We started. All right, folks, let's begin. I always like to reward those who showed up on time with the appropriate start. So I'm Kevin McDonald, chair of the CAC, and we have a good agenda for tonight and a lot of great information. But why don't we just do a quick round of introductions? Your name, if you have an affiliation, I'm a long one. So I'll give you an example. I'm Kevin McDonald. I'm with an agency service. I'm John Malata. I'm with one of those schools.
Nicholas Calderon, the Nation Conservancy.
Peter Wilson, I'm with Friends of the Long Time.
Lynn Arthur, I'm the coordinator for the town energy efficiency and subsoil program.
That's amazing. I have no official affiliations.
Nice person. Excellent.
I'm Sarah Alford. Sorry, it's a long name.
Thank you.
I'm Joyce Novak. I'm the new director of
Yay.
I'm Sarah Schaefer. I'm Congressman Program Director.
I'm Lauren Shear. I'm the new education outreach coordinator for the Congress.
Another yay.
Yay!
And Elizabeth Martin, Congress Program Coordinator. And I'm Rebecca. I'm the director of proposal programs for the Nation Conservancy Online.
So we continue to have experiments about physical locations and where we meet and how that works. And not surprisingly, Riverhead, or Southall, sometimes further east in Hampton. And we continue to evaluate how this works or doesn't, and what locations work or don't, and what time of the year works or doesn't. So we know that this is a continued experiment. Thank you all. So for the agenda, we have no additional amendments, possibly a brief discussion on some solar power, renewable energy at the end, just a quick plug on that. And so why don't we just go right into the program? Sarah, you.
Yeah, I was just going to give a few brief updates. We kind of already introduced our new staff people, but we're very excited to have Joyce and Lauren start. Joyce actually just started this Monday. So this is her first Citizens Advisory Committee meeting, and we're really excited to have her. Allison used to be the director of the County Education Program. They're all here. And Lauren started last Monday as the education outreach coordinator. And we're happy to have both of us. We're really excited. I guess I'll just do a quick update on our AOA monitoring that's been going on this past spring. We actually held a public meeting at this location 2 months ago in the main building. We had an AOA monitoring training. So we're back here again. And for some of you that have gone out, thank you so much. And we're happy to report that the AOA spawning populations have been growing in the Potomac River, and estimated there's between 40 and 50,000 AOAs coming to the Potomac River this year. So it's supporting all of our and a lot announced that along with CAC Association, the Potomac Estuary Program and Long Island Sound State worked together to create the Long Island Diagonal Fish Restoration Strategy, which just was formally released last week, which comes after about a year of work, which go between a bunch of organizations on Long Island to identify priority projects on Long Island. So I'm going to take a look at that strategy. It's really interesting to see where we think fish passage restoration, and also there's a great interactive map that goes on see where we would like to look to see making it up to water. So it's really great map. If you guys have any questions or interest in that, later on, I'll show you. That's about all the updates I have. We have a lot of great things going on, but we'll go through that throughout the agenda.
For people that on the testing the local geography, so the most visible fish passage for project is likely Granville. So you know when you're going into downtown Riverhead and come out of the traffic circle, and you look on the left, used to be a dam that used to fall, and now there's a rocky little strip.
Somewhere between 40 and 80,000. So it's estimate, this year's estimate is 40 to 50.
Is that a lot of fish?
That's a good number of fish. We hope it will continue to increase as we do more fish passport projects further.
Okay. All right, so you're going to move through a bit more a little later, and you talk about the CCMP update.
Right.
So, how many of you are aware of either the town or the county I'm sorry.
I understand Suffolk County.
What town do you mean?
Suffolk.
You don't have one in Suffolk. So, thank you for making the long trip around. Oh, all right. How do you stand from hazard?
It's sample.
Hi, Anne Marie, how are you? So anyway, the short story is there's a couple of things that are in process right now. So we adopted 4 years or so ago nitrogen as the killer threat priority pollutant problem that we had. Nitrogen, probably nitrogen action plan. And there was a series of strategies to reduce nitrogen. One of the issues is work with the county on their technology upgrades or waste disposal on site, and then develop a few incentive programs that were just funded. So the county has new technology that they're approving as of last July. And they also approved a septic incentive program, so homeowners going online to a website called reclaimourwaters.com. It's a really easy, user-friendly website. You just plug in the information that best you can. It tells you where you live, it shows you where you live on the map, and it tells you on the map whether you're in a priority area, a secondary area, or at this time, not eligible necessarily. But that only grows over time. And basically, what's emerging is there's a county rebate program, the town program, depending on what town you're in. And if you fuse all the rebates together, you almost get most of the cost paid for to do septic program. And the nitrogen reduction loads go from 60, 70 or more milligrams per liter every day to below 2/3, 3/4.
The threshold is 19.
Right. So if you're
the threshold, but there's systems now that
right, and in some cases, exactly. So like, think of the first computer you used. It was big, clunky, and slow in comparison to what you have today. Our hope is over time, as technology develops and the competition for the systems increases, that the efficiency of the systems will get better, their costs will be lower, their reliability will be higher, and this is the experience that most people find in any adaptation of technology, whether it's solar technology, computer technology, automobile technology. Maybe the only thing that really hasn't been improved on that I can think of offhand is the mousetrap. So, but the concept of continuing to build a better mousetrap is driving force here. But in any case, if you haven't already, you might want to go to the website and plug in your information to see if you qualify. And if you do, you could pursue further whether you should be thinking about getting a septic system upgraded. You don't have to, there's no obligation. It's not like an enlistment in the Army where once you sign in, you can't get out. So just think about doing it. Particularly if you live in a house that has an older system. One of my house is 50 years old. I'm on borrowed time. I know that. And that's something I'm actually thinking about doing. So, but the county has about 1,100 people that have expressed interest in this. And the county has a financing program that's financed. The state of New York gave the county $10 million this year and will for the next 5 years or thereabouts. And some of the towns in East Hampton and Southampton have a combined total of around $10 million each. I'm sorry, not each, combined to offer incentives as well. So a year and a half ago, there wasn't much money. Today, there's much more. So think about it. I'm sorry? Is reclaimourwater.com. And if you just Google on Suffolk County Septic Incentive Program, it will probably come up if you don't know that. And if everybody signs in on the sign-up sheet, we can email you the link after today so that you have it. And if any of you are having a real difficult and challenging time with how you want to proceed, my new friend Nico is hired to help everybody do just about anything imaginable. So he doesn't do laundry, he won't wash the car, but he'll help you figure out how to get through this, so we can help you figure it out for you. So please pass that on to your friends, particularly your friends that complain to you about a gurgling sensation present in their property, but not normal. That program continues. It's supposed to expand. The county's including newer technologies. And on the county's website, you can look at the technologies that are available. And their total prices are under $20,000. And you can get a rebate for at least $10,000 and likely more. And if your septic system failed tomorrow and you had to replace it, it would cost you probably $8,500 to $10,000 anyway. So this is an instance where when you do the calculation in your own head, you go, let me get this straight. I can get a rebate or an incentive where the total out-of-pocket costs are no greater than what they would have been. I can reduce pollutants by 2/3. It's not a bad deal. And that's the major contributor of nitrogen loading in the estuary. So those of you who are close to the water have an even greater incentive. There is a Long Island Nitrogen Action Plan report that is due out in June from Suffolk County and the state that is going to talk a bit more about what the nitrogen load target reductions are, which will have, for most of us, it's your on-site septic system and your fertilizer use, if you use it at all. And after that, we really can't control so much. So the hope would be that as we're communicating to people about what that information is suggesting in the industrial watershed, that people are thinking a bit more about what they can do and what their options are and what incentives exist for that to be addressed. So that's sort of that. Am I going back to Sarah for other program updates or to Lauren for that?
The DCMP update, we wanted to cover that quickly.
Sorry, did you have a question?
Can you just point to the website? I don't want to take up extra time,
Okay.
but I've heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard people say that some new septic systems require constant heating, so basically you're not good for someone which is a good
So-
So basically, if you're not using the toilet for a particular month, probably use. the balance is disturbed.
He just went to the meeting today, so tell us what you know.
First of all, I'd like to thank the Nation Conservancy for providing such an amazing leadership role on this issue, in education particularly.
Thank you, but there's plenty of other people working it, I appreciate
There are,
it.
but anyway, this is a complex system, a very complex system. And there are many systems now that are being considered, and some of them are more reliant on maintenance than others. Compared to the traditional systems, there will be a lot more required of the homeowner and the property owner. And in terms of maintenance, you can't just set them up and get it, which is the way the old systems pretty much are, unless they clog or you put in fish on the house and put in a new system. These systems are a lot more sophisticated. They all rely on biology in order to take the nitrate out. You're basically taking the nitrate out of the effluent and turning it into a gas and using it harmlessly into the air. So it's true, they do require more attention. Second, the big question in my mind is the seasonality of our community. Most of these systems, because they rely on biology, require constant use and so forth, but they are addressing that. Okay, there are so many different companies now that have jumped into this. This is a tremendous opportunity. It's like solar energy, all these things, and there's just a lot of systems out there, and they all try to address various aspects of it. And my understanding is that they do have control systems now that will mitigate the seasonal problem.
Well, if I can hop in too, the other thing, so there are different sort of stories, over a period of time. Well, we always heard that you had like dog food, throw the dog food down in the toilet, flush it. Nobody's talking about that, and largely because the theory goes something like this. There are some systems that have a medium that, once used again, really sort of charge up fast and are actually effective again at reducing all the things. But if somebody just isn't in their house for the months of January, February, March, because they're somewhere else, they fall over there, and they come back out in April and they start their system up again, for the months they weren't there, there really isn't any additional load. So if it takes 30 days or 3 weeks, 2 weeks or whatever, for a system to start up to be fully operational in terms of nitrogen removal, okay, it's better than what we had in place, which is a concrete ring that everybody just peed in. So Peter's right in the respect that it's different, and just like you probably have a service contract on your home heating and air conditioning system, so that whether you're having a holiday party or somebody else, you want to have the assurance of knowing if something goes wrong at a pretty inopportune moment with somebody involved. And we have all of us get our cars inspected every year, make sure it's still safe to drive, the tires aren't involved, and there's something wrong. And having these systems that have an annual maintenance visit to check that they're running and operating properly and efficiently is something different, but it's not. These aren't complex fighter jets that are underground. Right? They're relatively simple, and it's relatively simple biology, but they're a little more complicated than what we're used to dealing with. So these things will work themselves out, and there are some people that are early actors, and there are other people that are the later actors, right? Socially, who went out and got the first iPad? It wasn't me. So people
So the
have
first generation was the dog food mom, and then the next generation is working on biology.
well, and
So as you say, there's going to be iterations, but
yeah, and some people will say, the people most inclined to participate in this program are people that know very soon, at any moment, their system is going to have a real problem. And there's 5,000 to 9,000 of those every year in Suffolk County. So somebody who's got a fully functional system, if you believe in game theory or how that generally works, it's why would someone play? The first people that are going to play are, I back up once or twice a year, I have to do my system.
It's not a question for me, it's more like, I mean, how much has the system been tested?
I'm sorry.
How many weeks? Is this, how, I mean, you're making it sound like that. Maybe it's more issue. Austin.
It is for a lot of people, but it's a small price to pay for what we can open to do.
No, I'm just trying to understand.
And that's why the county is, that's why the authorities have jumped in and trying to mitigate that. But let's face it, it's human nature to take these later in society. I'd like to think that everything's going right out. I don't have one either, in my house, but, and spend the time and the effort. It is a mandate on the extent that you must put, well, at least in the
If you're doing new construction or major renovation, or you need an upgrade to your sanitary system.
If you're within, the town's not in it, if you're within one of the zones are established by proximity as watershed providers of water, almost anything you do now is going to require.
And the trend will continue that way. The idea of using cement rings only in sand and thinking that's acceptable, that's over. So now the question is, what does the transition look like going forward? And when are people in a circumstance where they're saying, I'm going to do this? If you signed in and you start your name, we can have someone follow up with you and answer some of the specific questions. Many of the questions.
It was just more in general, I was trying to understand. It sounds like it's basically the technology is iterating, changing. It was more because, I've heard that there were issues with, if you're gone for 2 weeks, does that mean you have
There's a lot of
so
things.
it just, so I just was trying to shake that up because I've never heard anything else. But thank you, this was helpful.
Yeah, so, but you're asking good questions, so we need an FAQ.
Yeah.
An operator asks FAQ on these sorts of things.
I actually want to talk to I know for some people what makes them hesitant to apply for one of these things is just sort of like the bells and whistles and paperwork and all that kind of stuff. Is it relatively straightforward to actually do these applications, or is there a lot of block?
Yeah,
We're having difficulty at the county level to processing. We're building an infrastructure to process the applications. And so it's kind of like jump-starting a new market that hasn't been around yet. And yeah, ideally, if you like to go fill out one page and then that's it. Make it really easy. So that's like the process for making it easier and easier. And as it rolls out, it will continue to be easier. With the question about whether it stops working, like the user, it's not a user problem necessarily, it's more an environmental issue where the nitrogen won't be as treated as it would be until it starts getting used again.
It typically takes something like 30 days for a system to go up and start functioning. It's brand new, it's empty, right? And the biology has to start working.
Yeah. But for the user, it's, you're still going to have things.
And it wouldn't require a repair or anything, it would just be a little bit less good at treating until you get it.
Right.
Well, actually,
This is an off-the-ball question. Might not be answerable. I'm thinking of putting one of these into a seasonal rental. So it only gets used 4 to 5 months a year.
you should have been 20 minutes early. You just have.
I'm sorry, I was late.
That's okay. I'm not going to hold it against you. Well, again, this will come up, right? There are some people that have seasonal uses, and the argument is if it takes a little startup time because you're back from your seasonal use, but you haven't been in it for 3 or 4 months or 5 months, you're not loading when you're not there, right? So,
It doesn't deactivate.
well, it just takes a little, it's slow to start up again. It's gonna need to get into a state of equilibrium and to work fully properly. But it's not like pouring concrete that you have to continuously stir it. And then if you don't stir it, the concrete hardens and the system doesn't work. That doesn't happen.
I think there seems to be a confusion between what needs time to start up again. It's not like it won't work as a functional
Correct.
system,
Correct.
it just won't process.
It's the biology of reducing the nutrients.
Right.
May take some.
But you
additional
can still
time.
flush your toilet.
Absolutely.
Okay, I think that might be the.
And no one has to run out when it's really cold and miserable. Open some flash, dump in a pile of
Right.
food, and then close it, and then light a match and watch it explode. And all kinds of crazy things. I mean, the reason I'm sort of making fun of this is not an accident. The people that don't want to get in that business and have a business interest still pursuing the existing paradigm are the ones that are going, you don't want to. And the people that are in the business are going, well, that could be done. Yeah, why? There's multiple business models that are being affected by this change in conversation. Sure.
Your concerns, almost half the town is either, homeowners or seasonal. Almost half, 50,000. So this is not, your question.
Southampton rescan.
Exactly. Well, Stanton's probably the same.
Yeah.
So given that statistic, I would think that, these are, you're right on, that's the question. But there's got to be, they have to have it. But I think your point is, well, good. I took it to do with that. The FAQ needs to speak to this. There needs to be a place to go where that question is answered in very easy to understand.
But these systems are relatively new. They've been around a long time, but they're really now getting going.
They're new to here.
And well, the technology's been around for a while. It hasn't bloomed, but now it's blooming. And it's going to take a little bit of time to shake them down, to modify them. There are many systems on the market now, and when you go out, you're serious about doing this, you will go out and select one that operates best for your condition. And there are some of them that are better to address that concern than others. But as time goes on, they're going to solve and address all this stuff. So, I mean, all along the coastal regions, we have seasonal use of homes. That's not an uncommon thing here in Florida. So it's a significant problem, and it will be addressed. But I can't think of anything, frankly, more important that we could be doing than this. I mean,
We are really glad you came tonight.
there are lots of things, on our priority list, doing things for our watershed, for our waters. But this is certainly one of the biggest ones. I think it's 70 or 80% of the contribution of pollutants comes from septic systems on Long Island.
It's higher, it's 70% around Long Island, and it's probably like 60 here.
Well, which is why it would be great to have an answer to say, well, this is why we got, story is not. But I don't know what the proper anecdote is, so which is why I think it would be helpful, because when people say, oh, I heard this, it would be nice to say, well, this is, but I don't know.
Oh, this is great feedback.
Anyway, so
I thought,
we turn to you.
All right, we'll get you one.
Go, Nico. But I thought that story stopped 3 years ago, so that it came up. It's great. No, this is great.
Another option.
Are you taking suggestions?
Yeah.
Nico does everything.
So what you said earlier about your concern about going up before, this should be done like the solar, rooftop solars. Contact the solar installer, they come to your house, they give you a free proposal, they answer all your questions. Once you say yes, they do it all. You fill out, you do nothing, they take care of it. Permitting, that's the way this should program be run.
You know, you and many others have suggested that, and the intent here is to try to get this model after that. So we appreciate that.
So we are working on that, it's in the horizon. We are working with the county to make sure that they're ready. We don't want to overload them until they're ready to actually process. The last thing we want is for people to be lined up and not get this. That would be conjecture.
We're people who make the money.
Right. Why not have that?
Isn't there a, like, Lycia is one on
Sarah, we'll find out if he wants to be here.
energy.
You just make things work.
There is, and that's a longer conversation, because it is been challenging. A lot of there's, you need to bring them all the way on board, and some people are happy with the current business model. And so that's part of creating a business model. We have to kind of, the industry has to prove to itself, we have to help prove to them that this is the future. And that hasn't been done yet. They don't see it as being, a big line of your business, at least not yet.
I would encourage you just to go visit the site. It is actually pretty easy. The county actually designed it internally. For them to design a website that functions internally is nearly miraculous. And it's actually pretty user-friendly by most accounts of it. Well, this is a good discussion. Thank you. And we need to think about how we're getting that information out to people so they find it. And if people do stumble upon, sort of, I heard that, they have to do cat food, not dog food. Feeding that back to us is really helpful so that we can try to figure out where we think that's coming from. All right. So why don't we move to Lauren and Jeff?
No, we're gonna do these.
We'll do the CC.
CCMP update first.
I'm sorry,
That's
I'm
it.
not reading this right. Let's do CCMP update.
Let's do it. Okay. Putting up everyone's great input that they've been giving so far and feedback. We really appreciate that. That's what we have to do. So the County District program is revising our CCMP, so that's our comprehensive conservation and management plan.
Which does.
I was.
Sorry.
So it's basically no, I'm gonna watch the video. So that plan is basically the blueprint for how the county estuary program manages the county estuary, water quality, habitat, and how we work with our partners and use our funding and other resources we have to work with our partners to manage the estuary. This plan was first written at soon after the birth of the county estuary program in 2001. So it's an old plan. It's still relevant in many ways, but it needs a little bit of an update. And so we're embarking on that update right now. So we are asking our Citizen Advisory Committee, general public, different stakeholders, watersheds, to please give us some input on what issues they are concerned with and what they want to see in this plan. So I'm going to show you a quick video that kind of summarizes the county estuary program and then a little overview about the CCMP and the process. Do you have a question?
Who's writing?
Who's writing it?
Yeah.
So the county estuary program is collecting feedback from all of our stakeholders over a long period of time. We're actually going to have a lot of public meetings over the next couple of years to collect information. We're working with the consultants, with Water Review Consulting. His name is Peter Taylor. We're going to work with him to create this document. So it's really going to be, he's going to assist us. We're going to collect public information, public feedback, bounce it off of our different committee groups, work within the county estuary program staff to write this document.
So the staff's
With help from a writing contractor, yes. Yes. Okay. Okay. Okay.
Everyone enjoyed that.
So as you saw, this is the Peconic Estuary watershed outlined in yellow. So all the rainwater and groundwater within that boundary there flows into the Peconic Estuary. So just a little general overview. We have 196 square miles of land within the Peconic Estuary, 247 square miles of surface water, a lot of shoreline, and our year-round residents almost triple in the summer months. And we are one of 28 national estuary programs in the United States. This is just going into a little more detail that was already explained in the video. So we were designated as a national estuary program by EPA in 1992. We were the 20th of 28 national estuary programs to be designated with this special designation. And we really operate as a very community-based, community-driven organization. We have a small staff, but we operate and succeed because we work well with our partners. So not only government and other environmental organizations, but also and the CCMP, as you heard, really came out of a citizen concern for the health of the Peconic Estuary. So in 2001, when this CCMP was published, our main focus in the estuary was brown tide. So that's how the program really came to fruition. People had concern about the coffee brown water in our estuary, and they wanted to do something about it. So naturally, the priority topics of concern were ground tide, nutrients, habitat, and living resources, pathogen pollution, toxic pollution, and critical land protection. And within the CCMP document, there's also sections to outline how we're financing all these priority actions, how we're doing our education outreach, how we're talking to the community, and how are we actually implementing some of these actions to achieve estuary habitat. So since the CCMP was first written, we've had some successes. Throughout the CCMP process, we've been able to get local support, regional support for a lot of our priority actions that we wanted to complete. We've been able to get a lot of funding for completing those actions, work with a lot of partners to get funding for those actions. On the nitrogen front, we worked to get a pollution diet for nitrogen loads into the estuary. So basically a recommendation how much nitrogen should go into the estuary, what should not go into the estuary for a healthy ecosystem. We were influential in getting major sewage treatment plant upgrades at riverhead sewage treatment plants. There were some improvements on duck farm waste management. The Peconic Estuary was designated as a no vessel waste discharge zone, so you can't just into your boat waste into the water. The Suffolk County fertilizer reduction law went into effect, and we were part of that, helping that come about. And also the riverhead sewage treatment plant effluent reuse project, so they're pumping treated wastewater into the Indian Island golf course right next to it. Next up, as Kevin and the group was discussing, septic system upgrade. That's the next chapter, I think, in our saga to try to reduce nitrogen pollution in the watershed. And on the pathogen front, we have helped a lot of the towns identify priority projects to reduce stormwater pollution, and also created an intermunicipal committee between the 5 East End towns, actually 6 East End towns, some of the villages, Suffolk County, New York State Department of Transportation, to work together to reduce stormwater pollution. And we hope to continue working with those groups to eventually open some of the shellfish beds that have been certified. We've had many successes working with the towns and organizations to complete habitat restoration projects. Over the past 18 years, we've helped complete 27 habitat restoration projects. A lot of these projects come from a habitat restoration plan that we worked on with the towns and environmental organizations to prioritize projects. There are 4 projects that are partially completed and a few that are in progress. And throughout this process, we've also been able to help our partners protect land. And the news is Bay Scout populations are rebounding, and as you heard earlier, LA populations are increasing in our watershed. And my Elizabeth created a nice map that shows where all these habitat restoration projects are, and it's a little box of information about each project.
Essentially, this is going to be an interactive map on the website, and you're going to be able to click on each of those dots and learn more about these projects. And we're also going to map out new projects that we've identified as priorities that we want to work on. So those are the completed ones. We have a whole list of new projects we'd like to get done too.
Can you clarify? So if the estuary program wasn't here, and it exists, might those things have happened? And what's the value added that the program does in the relationship with the other municipalities that enables projects like these?
Yes, so as we discussed as we're talking with all the towns and other environmental organizations that may have a location that they're interested in working on, we can, by prioritizing it in one of our plans, the County Estuary Programs plans, we can kind of bring it to a more of a regional level. You know, within the towns, there are priorities, but I think being involved with a regional organization such as the County Estuary Program brings your local priority into alignment with other regional priorities. We're also more successful together, I think, in getting funding from the state or federal funding for some of these projects if we can say this is part of a regional initiative. So I think that, and extra points are given on grant applications if you do say you are working with a national estuary program or some sort of estuary program in general. So if you have a project that you're interested in working on, please reach out to us. We can see how we
Good question.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of the research is focused on national, and that is probably one of the primary, nutrients involved in the algal formation and all pesticides, all that. But have there ever been any studies on soil near marinas? And you actually think in the soil function of supporting, I know what the destruction that does to the ecosystem. And I was wondering if that had any effect, or is that something that's not even being looked at? I don't know where you guys are.
Yeah, we're definitely some of that contamination is not good for the environment.
Yeah, I don't know how much research there has been on that. I know there are some efforts by some of our partners to do some education about, you know, best voting practices and what paints to use on your boat and that kind of stuff to reduce the amount of contaminants.
Even marine outdoor wells.
Sure.
You have to find an example. Two-cycle engines that nobody would use it. That was selling both. But I saw that in my yard. Some of the water that cools the engine goes to the engine, it goes onto my grass. I won't be able to grow anything in this grass for years. One spot. Nothing. And that's just using the two-cycle oil that comes to the standard US engines. So that, and I also watched the water clarity change from say January, where the water is black color, and then it goes to much more brownish color in July. So I mean, I know a lot of that's due to accessible what being used in the heat. I'm also wondering about coating and how much of it affects coating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something we will have to look, you know,
Yeah.
we'll have to consider and look at, and I think that's the type of information that we want to get from all our stakeholders as we're doing the CCMP update. What are the priority problems that we haven't looked at that we need to look at and address and do more about?
If I could interject, I think on the state level, they do the Clean Vessel Assistance Program, which they had for years. I don't know if it's still in play, but it offers money to boat holders and to marinas in general for various types of property waste disposal to happen in the marina. There was not a huge uptake in it on the marina side where if you need it, but the state for years did offer it and try and intercede. They offer training programs to recreational boaters. So it's out there certainly at a state level, and it's something that can be looked at.
Martin Grover's, biggest project in London, but he's doing a water study in Sag Harbor. There's just about 5 locations where they will take samples of the water. And I'm hoping that since it's data collected for 12 months, they'll be able to identify, they'll have wintertime, set a benchmark and then time to see what happens. It's kind of like a wait and see answer, but I'm really curious to see what will happen. It's many locations in Sag Harbor. I think it will be funded for a year, which seems like she has not longer let it be.
There was a discussion in California when they were doing old cars and what to do with them. They were actually contemplating, and I was thinking of this as you were describing it, buying old cars and retiring them, and buying 2-stroke engines necessarily, contemplating that and retiring their uses. And it's all about knowing where your real problems are and how to do them better. But as a general premise, most of the marina operators have been pretty good and supportive of the program as a collective and as an industry. And they have this sort of dual challenge, right? They are a source of water access for a lot of people that don't live on it. And they are a business operating in an environment that is sometimes hospitable and sometimes not very. And then they also want to please their customers and not be overly onerous on them for a lot of reasons, or just somewhere else. And so it's a bit of a challenge. But your point is worthy of reminding ourselves where can we do better. Ramesh, you have the application.
Yeah, I was glad to hear that comment. We've been moving on that slowly in East Town. And it sounds like there is a divergence of the management practices out here with what happens, say, around the city island, places like that, much higher density. I think that one of the critical pieces of the puzzle is creating catchments when they power wash the bottoms in the fall. And if that effluent goes into the surrounding waters around the marina, it's pretty poisonous. So that might be one particular point to look at. We've been trying to get a little headway with that, with finding out what's going on. But it appears that the local marinas around East Hampton are not filtering things to the extent that they should. In other words, it should be done in some sort of a containment area rather than just letting the stuff disperse.
There's some additional controls when you're power washing a boat. But when you're painting a boat, we're bottom paint.
It's the bottom.
Right? So that's a registered pesticide that has to be controlled a certain way. So the question of when you're power washing, are you discharging flakes or are you just washing them around? I don't know.
Well, this stuff is designed to flake off.
I understand. But I can't imagine it doesn't flake off easier with the power wash. Point there. Okay.
Yeah,
Keep
good,
going.
thank you. And then we are going to be kind of taking a further look into how we're prioritizing our habitat restoration projects in the future with climate change and improving our coastal resilience. So County Estuary Program also supports a few monitoring programs. We support Suffolk County Department of Health Services, surface water quality monitoring program, and 2 stations operated by the United States Geological Survey, which continuously collect water quality monitoring data in Riverhead and Nigerian. Those data sets are really important for us to try to understand what's going on in the watershed. We also support an atmospheric deposition monitoring program, which collects information about the nutrients, nitrogen coming from the atmosphere. So any fossil fuel gases that are getting up in the atmosphere, those that nitrogen eventually does make its way back down to the ground. So monitoring that is important to understanding what's going on in our watershed as well. We do eelgrass monitoring to see where the eelgrass beds are in our watershed and help tracking those eelgrass beds. As we said before, we do alewife monitoring within the Potomac River and other tidal or other tributaries within the Potomac estuary during the spring. We do wetland monitoring, monitor the changes in wetland health, and we also do some nitrogen pathogen monitoring within our watershed. So, public education now. Oh yeah, question.
The water monitoring, where do you put the data from?
The water quality monitoring.
Yeah.
So the Suffolk County Department of Health Services water quality monitoring is available online in a large Excel data spreadsheet. There are a few reports that summarize that data, but most of the data is just housed within this large spreadsheet. I can send around links to that.
And who analyzes the data?
So Suffolk County Department of Health Services staff have analyzed the data. I believe Cameron Engineering analyzed the data back in 2012.
Is it user-friendly accessible?
The data spreadsheet.
Or is it like reading an encyclopedia?
It's kind of like reading an encyclopedia. We know that data is not the most user-friendly, and we're trying to work with Suffolk
Yeah,
County.
because that's the key, is the public being able to see the information is really, really important. And there's other organizations working on some water quality tests. I'd love to see some kind of just putting all that testing together. You know, because I don't know if anyone's seen the Surfrider Foundation, but they have a wonderful data system, and it's really clear, it's really user friendly, and it would be so great to get these things out there, because we need more transparency.
Yeah, sure. We do have.
Because your website is brilliant. Why don't you have it? Boom. On the website.
That's the goal. We're working on that.
We have an ecosystem status report, which we did use that data to kind of show trends in water quality over the past 10 years. But even in that format is a little difficult to understand. So we're working on maybe putting it in a format where people can just easily understand what's going on.
Let me help you out. So, for those of you that watch TV in the evening and you see the little ticker that runs at the bottom of the page, watch CNBC or Wall Street Week or something like that, you see a whole bunch of data. This is what the Dow Jones Industrial Average did, right? So it's raw data, uninterpreted by an expert, is questionable, right? So your point is entirely fair, which is, how is the data that is being collected being converted into usable and easily understandable information so that the public can draw
Chart it. You can see the spikes and up and down.
But even interpreting the spikes is important. What does the spike mean, right? So, but I take your point entirely. It's a question of making the data available and accessible and meaningfully analyzed to help a person who may not be the scientist understand what all these things. Excellent.
And we understand that. I think, if we're going to be able to show people why things need to change, have them understand why things need to change.
Yeah, you don't even, just to chart it.
Yeah. And so the USGS water quality monitoring stations, there's 2 of them in our estuary. Those are, they're shown, if you go to the USGS website and find the 2 stations, that data is plotted continuously. It's uploaded to their website, I think, every 6 minutes. So you can see almost real time what's going on in Orient Harbor and then Riverhead. You can really see the difference between the two areas of the watershed. So one, Riverhead is a little more nutrients, more heavily populated, less flushing, and then Orient, more flushing, less population, less nutrients. So it's interesting if you look at those two, you can get a real good idea of what's going on.
I heard Montauk's doing it.
Oh, are they?
I think they're doing it. Montauk.
Consensus is a lot of
Oh, cool.
work with USGS.
That'd be awesome.
A quick question on the expert, seem to be stimulating paranoid. Where is the station?
It's right behind the Suffolk County Marine Environmental Learning Center in Southwold, Cedar Beach.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is there any chance that of adding a radiation monitoring device? Since we have these rather notorious plants not very far away across the sound.
We can look into it. I don't know.
A lot of people that don't know, we don't know much about what's going on.
There used to be one. There was a doc, I think it's doing a study of that.
Yes, yeah,
And I
that
think-
two-step,
and I think he put a radiation monitor.
yeah, that group went out.
Yeah.
Gone. You know,
Where was that?
there was a group in East Hampton.
Yeah, they were working probably just 50 years ago. And they were studying, fillings and stuff. People living in the area.
Lady chief.
I had one of those before.
But those millstone plants are not known for being operated.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, and so here we are at the Citizens Advisory Committee meeting. So we, of course, value public input. So we have our Citizens Advisory Committee meetings. We have this great program, it's a life estuary, where we have students throughout the estuary go out one day a year and sample our farmland, or fauna at their beach that they go to, and all that data is collected and made available to the local national lab, and it's great activity for science and dirty that. We have a lot of citizen science opportunities, volunteer events, of course, you can find us on social media. We have newsletters, we have a spring newsletter over there if you guys haven't looked at already. And through all of these activities, we like to make sure that we're actually changing. So we try to track if we're actually making progress, and that gives us an idea of if we're doing a good job. So I guess one example is our homeowner rewards program, where we provide rebates to homeowners for putting in native plantings, putting in rain gardens, rain barrel. So we like to track before they do their project if they're using fertilizer or what's their perception of fertilizer use, and what are their behaviors on their property, and then after the project, if we actually made any sort of impact on how they use fertilizer use or managing the property in that way. Other than that, we like to do surveys before and after our CAC meetings sometimes. I'm not doing that today, but for our information, we're doing a presentation. No? Okay. So if we do a presentation on a certain topic, before the topic is presented, we'll do a survey, get people's view of whatever we're talking about, and then after the presentation, get people's input on what they've learned.
So more specifically, you have an average plan for septic?
We are working on it. We kind of, we're going a little slow and steady here, trying to educate our citizens advisory community, promoting things on social media, on our website. And, you know, these programs progress, I think we'll have more of an idea of how to reach out to people and how to make an impact. And as Kevin was saying, I think many people in the group are saying that these programs are new. People still have some uncertainty about them. So where can we best position ourselves to help promote these technologies and educate people online? Okay. But I think Elizabeth, you're gonna go into this section here.
Okay. So Sarah kind of gave you a rundown of all the things that we have done or that we are doing. And as we mentioned, though, we are updating our comprehensive conservation management plan because our last plan was in 2001 and things have changed a little bit since then. So on the left here is what was in our original CCMP, and then on the right table here is what we plan to, or what we think we are going to put into this new CCMP. So you can see we plan to combine some of the topics from the original CCMP, like nutrients, pathogens, toxins, into one large chapter under water quality. And the reason for that is lots of the water quality pollution sources are the same, so there are a lot of overlapping things that we do, like upgrading your septic system to reduce nitrogen, can also help to reduce pathogens, and maybe some of the toxins as well. And then when the original CCMP was started, as Sarah mentioned, brown tide was the big issue, but we actually have not had any brown tide in recent years, but we now have a full host of other harmful algal blooms to worry about. So that's going to be an update in our new plan. And nitrogen is obviously going to be the biggest focus in that water quality section, but pathogens and toxins and also marine debris will be covered in that section as well. And then, like in the original CCMP, we will have a section on habitat and marine resources. It deals with habitat restoration. We're going to combine land protection into our habitat and marine resources chapter, and we'll also talk about sustainable resource use in that chapter.
What do you think that means?
Sustainable resource use, just using our resources, making sure that everyone has access to those resources and that we're not depleting anything in an uneven way. Okay, you interrupted and asked a question. Okay, like fish, yeah, not taking too many fish from the environment. And then the next one, we will, again, public engagement and stewardship is a big part of what we do and building a regional consensus. We want to continue to increase our citizen science program and make sure that we are getting all of our stakeholders involved and reaching out to new people that we perhaps have not engaged with very well previously. And then a new topic, and our topic for tonight's CAC meeting, will be climate change. So climate change is not in our original CCMP, but it's a huge issue now. So we are going to have a chapter in the new CCMP on climate change and resiliency that will deal with things about how can we plan for climate change, what are some tools to adapt to climate change, and what can we do to increase coastal resiliency and help to mitigate some of the climate change impacts. And then, like in the original plan, we'll also have a monitoring plan, a strategy for how we're going to finance everything and implement everything, and what is our program management structure that will work on implementing all those actions. I don't know if I pressed the button. Oh, it's back. I don't know. So, no. Okay. All right. So that's any questions about that? Yes. What is my view on
any climate changes about
Right.
is one of the big elements. How does that intersect with the mission?
We're gonna talk about that.
Yeah, yeah, I think Allison's gonna get to that, so. Yeah,
Coming up on 2 decades.
yes,
I think it would be very helpful to have some kind of metrics of progress, like, what would the decadal metrics, after the first decade of the program being in effect, were there changes in the nitrogen, what were the primary changes in bluegrass,
yeah,
and so on.
right.
And the shellfish harvests and the finfish harvests
Yeah,
that there are, metrics that people can focus on of where we're coming from and where we're going.
sure. So I think a lot of that information is in that ecosystem status report Sarah's mentioning that we produced that summarizes all of those things that you just mentioned: the status of our eelgrass, finfish abundance, base scallop, landing, water quality, and with this new CCMP update, we will be making new or looking at what our metrics were from the previous CCMP and revising those metrics and updating those metrics. And hopefully, I think working on a system, maybe through our website, to make it a little bit more user and public friendly so that everyone can kind of track how well we're doing, and that will be easier for everyone to see. But that's
Yeah,
a great
I
point.
think, the website was not in existence when the program started.
Yes, it's much better now, and we hope to
It's way
continue
better.
to
It's really
build
well
on
done.
that.
I think using those tools and to build public support and having some definable,
Sure. Yes.
simple goals would be very helpful.
Yes. And yes. And so I guess that brings me to the CCMP revision schedule and how all of you can participate and help in determining what those goals are going to be in our new management plan. So we are just basically getting started with this process. Our first task is to hold numerous stakeholder meetings throughout the estuary and to get input from all of our diverse stakeholders, farmers, fishermen, aquaculturists, local governments, environmental groups, and find out what matters to them and present on what are the things that we think should be in the plan, but then get feedback from all of our stakeholders on what they think of those ideas or what they think we've missed. So we are going to be holding a lot of stakeholder meetings at the end of this month. And on the next slide, I have a few dates that I will share with you for meetings that you can attend and provide further input. So that's going to be occurring through May and maybe into June, and we'll probably wrap up our stakeholder engagement, this first stakeholder engagement phase, the end of summer. And we will then compile all of that input and work with the PEP staff and the contractor that we've brought on board that Sarah mentioned earlier to put together a draft plan that will then get reviewed by all of our partners and will then go out for another round of public input. So we hope to release that draft plan to you sometime early to mid next year so that you can provide further feedback and comments to us. And we hope to have a final plan by the end of 2019. So this is kind of a long process, but that's the timeline that we are looking at.
And what do you want to do?
So we need your input. We are having 3 public meetings around the estuary. One on May 23rd at the Bridgehampton National Bank, not far from here. One on May 24th on the North Fork at the Conic Lane Recreation Center, and one on Thursday, May 31st on Shelter Island. So I would encourage you to attend one of those meetings if you're interested in providing further input about this management plan and hearing more about what the plan
what we're thinking for these new priorities and actions and strategies that we work on. We also have a survey on the website where you can also provide input about what are the issues that are important to you. We have surveys over there too. And we have surveys tonight that you can take with you, so you can fill out a paper copy, or you can go to our website and fill out a survey, and we encourage you to tell your friends as well and share this information. Yes.
If anyone is interested in doing extra surveys to distribute to their networks, friends, and family, we also have some that are in address and stamped envelopes. So we made it really easy to fill out the question. If you want to know, you can come and ask us about it. Oh, a lot of people did yesterday. I guess we dropped that stamp today.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, great. Great.
The online survey is really easy. I've used it.
Great, thank you. Yes, we'll follow up. Any more questions? Everyone's gonna come to one of these meetings here?
And you can come to a meeting, we're gonna be talking about this at all of our student advisory committee meetings.
That's
We're gonna have a page on our website where we're gonna allow public comment.
Yes.
So if you can attend the meeting in person, reach out to us.
So, does everyone have the CAC investor talking points? Okay. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to run through this pretty quickly. So basically, as we've heard, the county estuary program is to protect and restore our county estuary. And to do that, we want to gain support of the community. We want to gain support of the citizens that live in the county watershed. So our goal is to inform citizens as best we can about the science, and the issues that the estuary deals with. So we have this CAC ambassador program. We invite you to kind of be ambassadors of the kind of estuary program and help us share the message of clean water and all these great things that the estuary is doing. So the first point is the CCMP public input meetings that Elizabeth was just talking about. So the dates are right there in May, and then
Yeah, I was just gonna say, as always, you can share those meetings and invite people to those. That would be really helpful for the community. As well as sharing our regular posts on Facebook, and maybe some of you have seen our new Pep Talk monthly video series that we started this year. We address the topic, I mean, of course. So we've been doing that on social media, so we share.
Yeah, and social media is such a big part of just marketing in a sense of the world of today. So if you click like or share any of the posts that we post, then everyone that you're friends with will see it, and then it goes from there. So it's really helpful to use these social media platforms. And then if we flip the page, then we want to encourage people to share about the Suffolk County Septic Improvement Program that Kevin was talking about earlier. As we know, erosion pollution is one of the top priorities that we combat will be estuary. So to just tell people about these new innovative technologies and that there is an option to upgrade your septic systems. Just the more awareness, the more we can get these properties treated. And then machine line receptacles. Yeah, we have a monitoring machine line recycling program. There are 18 receptacles around the estuary, and they're all on the app on our website along with partner locations. So we have around and yeah, and it's a very important thing, is fishing line can really affect the species that live in the estuary. All marine life can get affected by fishing line. And then the next point is that we want to encourage citizens to look at the homeowner rewards program that we have. Sarah was talking about earlier. Basically, you have the opportunity to get reimbursed up to $500 if you plant a native plant garden, and it would have to be at least 50 square feet, or a rain barrel, you install a rain barrel on your property, it would have to be at least 50 gallons. So things like this, as we incorporate these things into our properties, we are minimizing runoff, or polluted runoff into our dates. So there's a great financial incentive program that you can go on our website and apply to be pre-approved if you live within the product watershed program. And then speaking of that too, the tools and resources on the product watershed program's website, we have a native plant database. So if you don't know where to start, like if you don't know native plants there are, nurseries to go to, there's a great resource there on the website that goes to all these native plants and just other fun things to get kids involved. There's some downloadable kids materials on our website. There's management practices, fun quizzes and tests to test your knowledge on the estuary. And I don't know about grocery category. But first, I want to plug horticulture inhabitants. Plant sale coming out next weekend. There's going to be plant sales there. Well, here in Richmond, and where you can find me. So, where? Show the Richmond community house. On the grounds, so be outside. Maybe show them. And thinking about Bustamante, who's she's running some. And then we sell plants from farm wholesalers, and then we have a number of plants that people will probably contributing. So, and thanks to you all for coming, talking about the rebate program this winter. We had a great turnout to discuss it. A little bit of preaching to the choir, but everybody was thrilled to know more about the website. We also have grocery crab launching starting on Sunday, weather dependent. So if anyone's interested in helping with those surveys, we welcome volunteers on those sites. More information on our social media website. Yeah, and with grocery crab monitoring, it's really cool that any volunteers can just come and help us collect data on this and get to tag these horseshoe crabs, and then that goes into a large database. I believe it's Fish and Wildlife. Okay, so they find that horseshoe crabs are traveling between Long Island and Rhode Island and Virginia and Connecticut. It's just crazy that so you'd be a part of collecting this data. You find horseshoe crabs coming back and that they're tagged already. Record that, and so it's really great. This is one of our citizen science programs that we want citizens to be involved in the science. And so another monitoring program we have is the Diamondback Terrapin program, which is fairly new, and so that also can be involved with in just locating where their nests are, and I believe that they're now a threatened species because they were harvested, unregulated harvesting. So just these are a few of the citizen science programs that we have, and they're starting out since this spring. So these are just some talking points that you can take home, and feel free to please spread the word about what we're doing and to help get other people involved. And we do have our next CAC meeting scheduled for September 7th. Yeah, so it's at a brewery next time, which will be a little different atmosphere next time. So please come to that as well. And yeah, so just we all come together as a community, sharing the message, the more we can get done. So with that, we'll go to Allison.
Thank you.
She's going to talk about climate change.
Such an uplifting topic.
I
promise though, I'm not gonna do too much doom and gloom, just at the very beginning, and then we'll talk about what we're supposed to do about it. So, as Lauren said, my name is Allison Brinkle. I'm the Director of Coastal Programs for the Nature Conservancy on Long Island.
So my job at the Nation Conservancy is to worry about what's happening with climate change and how we're adapting to it. So my team does not work on climate mitigation, which is what you were asking about before, and lots of other folks in this room actually are involved in different mitigation projects. So climate mitigation is where we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to try to lessen the impact of climate change. So these are some figures from the International Panel on Climate Change. The top one, if you could see it underneath the red green thing, it would say carbon dioxide concentration. So the top is carbon dioxide, and it shows you over time, the different colors are sort of different climate models based on essentially how good a job we do in climate change. So the bottom one, the blue one, is if we really kick it into full gear tomorrow and reverse everything terrible we've done, you'll see we're still in kind of rough shape, but it's not so bad. And then as you go up in colors, those predictions are worse and worse. And that top one, the red one, if we have some serious ice melting, so if basically that's the path we're on now, by the way. Really, we're doing nothing right now, especially in America, to address our climate change impacts. And so if we keep that up, that's sort of your worst case scenario up top. And what that results is rapid ice melt at the poles, which is going to cause tremendous sea level rise. So the top is carbon dioxide. The middle one is the change in temperature. So it's a greenhouse gas, carbon dioxide. We call it greenhouse gas because, like a greenhouse, which keeps the heat in and keeps the plants happy and healthy over the winter, that's kind of what's happening to our Earth. Carbon dioxide is greenhouse gas that keeps us from freezing to death like we would on another planet. But with too much of it, we're keeping too much in. So the temperature is rising. And again, the models vary, but it's going up. It's just a matter of degrees, how fast and how much it goes up. And one of the biggest impacts that causes, besides just warming temperature, is sea level rise. And that's due to a combination of things, changes in currents as well as thermal expansion of the ocean, and a few other minor things having to do with the pattern of the tides. But essentially, massive amounts of sea level rise. Like I said, rapid ice melt, we're going to have, that's 7 meters, not feet. So 7 meters, that's 21 feet. In several hundred years, it could be as bad as that. If we don't get it together and fix our carbon. So these are IPCC numbers. These are from their 2014 report. They're currently wrapping up a more recent one, and as you probably all know from hearing the news, every time they come out with new numbers, they're worse. So
the state.
Yes. So it's bad news, is my summary. We're doing terrible things to our Earth, and we can, in some ways, it's too late. We're not going to go back to where we were, but we can do a lot now to prevent us from going way off the rails on those red lines and stay down on those gold lines. So that's what a lot of folks on the East End who are working on solar and wind power and all those kinds of things are trying to prevent the fossil fuel pollution. But what I want to talk about is the impact this is having in places like the Chronic Estuary. Red. I did for you.
Oh, thank you.
Maybe. Okay. So this is just a zoomed in version. So this is temperature change on the left side there. And so those are just sort of the low and high. And what I want to show you primarily is that right now, and for the last several years, we've been kind of living in sort of what someone calls the luxury of the shallow part of the curve. So it's been getting a little warmer, things have been changing a little bit, but it's pretty small, and we're getting soon to that point where it really accelerates. And this figure on the right is meant to just give you a sense of how many things are going to change. When we talk about global temperature change, we're only talking about a couple of degrees. And for a lot of people, that doesn't mean much. You know, yesterday was 5 degrees warmer than today. What's the big big deal, but when you average it across the globe and you change by 1 or 2 degrees, that makes a huge difference. Because that means huge changes in conditions that we're experiencing every single day. So when you get around 2, 3, 4 is the threshold that they say where kind of our civilization is going to break down a little bit. So unique and threatened systems are already in trouble. Extreme weather events, as we know, are happening much more quickly. They're much more severe. Widespread impacts, global aggregate impact starts to affect our economy. And so I just want to be clear that when we talk about just 1 or 2 degrees, it's not like a weather 1 or 2 degrees. When we talk about the average annual change, it's a big change. Adele, can you make that play? It's okay if not, but give it a try. If you move the mouse, you should be able to, yeah, see the little play. So this is just an animation to show you. It's just loading, I think, hopefully. You know. The point is, over the last 100 years, it's been sort of stable.
Let's try it.
What? It doesn't like it. That's okay. It was just an animation meant to show you that over time, temperature fluctuates, but those fluctuations are going up and up and up and up. Just like that line is going up and up and up. And right now, it's gone from sort of a bluish white globe, and over the last 20 years or so, it's really turned red. And so here's the impact on the ocean. And these are global average sea levels that we're talking about. Similar thing with the high and low estimate. So over the last 100 years, we've already seen about a foot of sea level rise. And like I said, we're now getting into that exponential curve where it's accelerating very quickly. And what happens when you have sea level rise is you have flooding. So we have storm flooding, but we also have flooding from sea level rise, what we call sunny day flooding. So everyone knows a place where now, every time there's a high tide, or at least every time there's a spring tide, there's some water around. And that problem is about to get much worse. Right now, we call it nuisance flooding because it's just a nuisance. It happens maybe once every couple of months, but soon, and in more and more and more places, it's going to be happening more often. I'll just point out that this data is from the EPA, so take it with a grain of salt. But really, if the EPA says it, then it's got to be 10 times worse than it. That's my experience looking for climate figures on the EPA website recently. But so these little bars in all these different cities are meant to show you. Orange is the flooding frequency in the 50s, and then the blue is the flooding frequency in the 2010s. So dramatic increase in flooding in pretty much everywhere that they erupt along the Atlantic. And we're in sort of a, because of the pattern of the way the tides work, we're in sort of a hotspot for sea level rise, and then North Atlantic, close to the United States. So what does that mean in Congress, really? So this is the map of Suffolk County. Hopefully you recognize it. I've just zoomed in a few places where it's extra dramatic. So these are different sea level rise projections. And this is what happens. The landscape changes quite a bit as we get more and more into sea level rise. And 6 feet is probably the best case scenario at this point for 100 years from now. So we're going to have several islands from Napeague to Montauk. We're going to have a whole series of islands. We're going to have the island of Orient. Greenport is going to be an island. The area around North Sea is going to be very different. The area around Sag Harbor is going to be different. North Haven is going to be a whole bunch of different islands. So we're looking at really dramatic changes to our life. And I think everybody knows who lives on Long Island, and certainly all around the country. True, about half the population of the United States lives within 50 miles of the coast. People, all of the dense population is all of the brown in this figure, in that sort of background map. And a lot of that dense population is right along the coast. That's putting a lot of people in harm's way. This is that sunny day flooding that I talked about. Flooding in our roads. So we are super vulnerable to flooding, both from storms and from sea level. So our goal, and that, so these are roadways that are vulnerable to flooding. The green is inundated at least once every month, and the yellow is inundated just by big storms. So you can see in some areas, these are those same 2 areas zoomed in on Mastic Beach and Orient. A lot of areas
we're heading in the direction by 2080s that we're gonna be flooded, major arteries where we need to drive are gonna be flooded at least once a month. So I'm showing all of these things to tell you that this is a serious problem that we need to worry about, and we need to better understand what to do about it. So as sea level rises and flooding happens, all of those coastal habitats, such as salt marshes that we have that are super important, as you heard earlier, have estuary, they're now going to be underwater. So what happens? Salt marshes are very resilient. They can migrate inland if you allow them to. They can, if they have enough sediment and enough tide, they can build up in elevation and they can migrate inland. But this is massive peninsula, but this is the same all around the estuary. There's a lot of development behind all those salt marshes. And so it's going to be important that as sea level rises and as it becomes difficult to live in these places, we get all of this infrastructure out of the way so that those marshes have room to migrate. Skip this in the interest of time. So the goal that we need to establish is to make Long Island more resilient. So make our coastline more resilient. And that's sort of a buzzword that nobody's really sure what it means, resilience. I resisted the temptation. A lot of times when you see presentations about resilience, you see little cartoons of springs. The idea behind resilience is that you can withstand the changes that are happening. So we want our civilization to be able to withstand all of this flooding, rising temperatures, all of the impacts that are happening with our changing climate. We want to be able to withstand it and bounce back and still be able to live here on Long Island. So in order to do that, we need the entire system to be healthy. And that's what one of the things that the County Estuary program is working on, and many other groups represented around the room today. And for the whole system to be healthy, we need 5 things. We need clean water, a dynamic sediment system, room to move, a full range of tide, and we need people out of harm's way. So clean water we've already heard a lot about, so I'm not going to believe it. Upgrading our wastewater treatment, addressing our fertilizer use, some of the most important things we can do to keep our coastal ecosystem healthy and to keep ourselves healthy. Clean water is really important because a lot of the habitats along the coast, the wetlands, the seagrass, the shellfish, which kind of buffer storm energy and help to protect us when there are storms, will not survive if the water's not clean. So it's not only important for the animals, not only important for the ecology, but it's important for the people as well. It sure is. So that's a good one that I didn't point out. Thank you. So what Ramesh said is that sea level rise are also going to affect our aquifer, and that will happen in a few ways. So the first thing that will happen is some of that groundwater is actually going to get closer to the surface. So that's a problem for flooding in areas where the groundwater is already very close to the surface. It's a problem for drinking water, and it's a problem for all of our wastewater systems. So everybody who has a septic system and a cesspool, it's a certain distance from the groundwater because the rules say it has to be far enough so that the pathogens don't get into the groundwater, which we drink. So if the groundwater rises, now nobody's septic system is far enough away. So yet another reason it's important to upgrade the system. But until we get everybody's upgraded, that's an important issue. And as I said, drinking water. So not only will the groundwater table rise, but salt water will inundate the ground. So that is an issue for everyone. Hopefully everyone is aware. Groundwater is the water that's underneath our feet, sort of between the soil spaces. We call that an aquifer. And that is the water that we're drinking. So everybody that is drinking water, even if it comes out of the faucet from the Suffolk County Water Authority, it came from a well underground. So yet another important reason why putting our wastewater into the ground virtually untreated is a terrible idea because we're drinking it. It's not just important for algal blooms and for water quality, but it's important for people too. Thus far, we're not polluting it enough to make it unsafe to drink. The Water Authority does a very good job keeping it clean, but there are a lot of places, in particular in agricultural areas, where there's too much nitrogen in the water even to be safe to drink. So that's important to know. If you have a private well, make sure you're getting it tested. It's important to know what's in it. both in terms of pollutants, but also salt. Okay, so clean water, super important to a healthy system. Dynamic sediment is another important one. Whenever we're faced with flooding or erosion or these natural processes that threaten people, our natural tendency is to resist them, to build something stronger to keep it out. We see a lot of shoreline hardening around the Congress today, and that's an issue that is going to come up during the CCMP update and it's going to have to be addressed. Back when the first CCMP was written, a goal was set of no net increase in hardened shoreline. And very little has been done policy-wise to make that happen since the first CCMP. So something that I'm going to come to these public meetings and say is that we need to work on that problem. Not all erosion is bad. There are certainly coastal places that need to be protected that are super important, but we need that sediment. The salt marshes need that sediment and the beaches need that sediment. So what really needs to happen is a more critical decision process where we think, is it necessary to protect this place? And then only if it's necessary do we protect erosion. Because not all erosion is bad and we need some of that sediment in our system. Room to move is an important one. So like I said earlier, salt marshes, and the same is true for beaches, they're very naturally resilient. They can replenish themselves if they're allowed to, if the system is allowed to remain natural. So as sea level rises, the seaward edges of the marsh will drown and they will no longer be wetlands, but the landward edge can take over forest, or it can take over scrub, rush areas like this in the foreground of this photo, and migrate inland and up in elevation as sea level rises. And as long as it's allowed to and has enough sediment in enough water that the plants are healthy, it will be able to do that. But because of our coastal development, there's not going to be enough. So that's something really important that we should consider in our land use planning and also in our open space conservation, that we make room for marshes to do that. And the full range of tide is also super important. So these wetlands can't be healthy unless they have that full tidal signal in and out every single day. And because we live all along the coast, you saw all of those roads. Pretty much every creek around the Potomac Estuary is crossed by a road, or a trail, or a railroad, or often all three. And so it's really important that the infrastructure, where all of our human uses are crossing creeks and wetlands, rivers even, it's really important that all of that infrastructure is sized correctly to let the full range of tide in and out. And that helps make us more resilient to large storms as well, because stormwater flows out through those systems. So it prevents that sort of storm-related flow. Also super important for keeping our whole system healthy. And then lastly, which was in the early days of the Potomac Estuary program, not really a consideration, I think it will be this time around, is the people. We are part of that ecosystem too. And it's really important that the community in our coastal system and in the Potomac watershed is happy and healthy along with the organisms. And to get to that point, we need the people to be able to adapt to sea level rise and flooding as well, and all of the climate impact. So I'm sure these pictures are familiar to everyone living on the South Fork. This is in Montauk. And this is just a little animation from the Hamlet study that East Hampton put out several months ago. And what I just want to say about this is that climate change is happening. The storms are getting more severe. The big ones are coming more often. And regardless of that, the sea level rise, which is slower and less dramatic, but very certain and more permanent, is flooding us more and more, with or without the storms. So we really need to start planning to adapt to those changes. And I think the story of what has happened in Montauk is a good example. After Hurricane Sandy, they sort of found themselves in a predicament. The hotels along the beach were about to fall in the ocean, and there was no plan. We weren't really ready. We didn't really know what to do. And when the government showed up with a big truck of money and said, we'll give you all this money if you do it our way, what choice did we have but to say yes? And what has resulted is a situation that really nobody on any side of the argument is too happy with. So the hotels are only very slightly less vulnerable than they were before. There is very little beach to speak of. Those economic engines of Montauk are struggling to do the thing that they do to keep Montauk alive. And the town is saddled with a tremendous bill to maintain this project. And so everyone has taken a step back there and said, okay, it is what it is, we're dealing with it, but let's get ready, let's make a plan so that as sea level rises and erosion is a problem for us, when we're not in crisis mode, let's plan what we should do so that we're ready next time. And so a lot of work has been done. It's not finished, there's a lot more work to be done. But the town is starting to propose some pretty radical ideas about moving those hotels back away from the beach, creating some public open space that kind of buffers the population from the erosion and from the sea level rise, but allows them to maintain that major tourist industry that keeps Montauk alive. And regardless of what you think of the details of what they've proposed thus far, there's a lot of work for them to do to sort that out. The procedures of how that's all going to happen and how it's fair and equitable to everyone is still to be worked out. But at least they've started and they're making a plan. And so it's going to be important really for all of the communities around the Congo estuary to start to think about these impacts that are coming. You know, the curves are uncertain only in that we don't know how soon those major impacts are going to get, but they're coming. And so it's important that all of the communities begin to plan. And it's important that folks like you who show up at meetings like this are the ones that make the decisions about what they want their community to look. So when it comes time to start this planning process, please get involved. I think that folks like you are going to have to push elected officials to begin these planning processes. It's not free. There's a lot of money out there to help municipalities and communities figure out what they want to do. But we have to begin to plan so that we can create a healthy coastal system that will be resilient to all of it.
Thank you for that. Questions for Alice?
Thank you.
When you told the story about sea level rise, and you know what happened over time. And because I'm also in the business of creating a narrative that creates a compelling reason to act to my audience. So have you thought of that little nugget? And by the way, I was one of the people, small group that pushed you out of the well done. But in that case, and I'm reminded of the one data element that really I felt drove people to act was when we created this cycle of, you know, you have the bag, it's going to be, you know, it ends up in the landfill, it gets blown into the ocean, rays of the sun, you separate the bag, it's pellets, goes from the ocean, big fish eat that, big fish eat the big fish, and you're in the part. We showed the impact on human health and talked about the effect of plastics. I fortunately was in grad school at the time, partnered with work with the Untitled Plan, which we executed in Suffolk. And she was someone who studied the effects of plastic on the intestine. So it's really rare to tell the story. So I'm wondering, and this may be just an idea, if we could create this cycle, you know, on one chart of how, you know, CO2, sea level rise, you know, water, aquifer, drinking water, that's for any parent. That is a chilling thing. So I just thought that's an idea. Work on that. If you know that exists, that's a great story. That cycle of what happens. I can use it in my head. That's great.
Video sometimes showing how all those impacts are.
Yeah.
The
That's
negative
the
feedback.
best if you can write, but we have no fun. So I'll exchange parts with you. You've seen that, or you have any suggestions?
Yeah, that's great, I appreciate that. So I sometimes do actually talk about part of that cycle when I talk about wastewater treatment. So Long Island is a sole source aquifer, so that groundwater that's under our feet is the only source of fresh drinking water we have on Long Island. And the wastewater treatment systems we use, the septic systems and cesspools that we're trying to get upgraded, essentially what they do is put that wastewater right down into the groundwater. So it's the feedback loop is very small. You know, we pee in there and then we drink it. It's really that small. And the technology, especially anybody that has a house older than about 1970-ish, it's what they have at their house is a cesspool, which is essentially a fancy hole in the ground. And so when I go in other parts of the country and talk to people about the work we're doing, and I say, oh yeah, we still have all these cesspools on Long Island. Oh, is it a rural area? And I say, no, we have millions of people. And they say, really? But you still have all these cesspools? And I say, excuse me. And I say, yes, and we have a sole source aquifer. So we're drinking that groundwater. People don't believe me. They really don't. They say, surely you must be mistaken. They think I don't understand how the water cycle works. It's really a very serious thing. So exactly that type of feedback loop. Excuse me.
These other stories, people who are not on the coastline see a coastal, well, that's happening for them.
Yep.
That's not affecting me, but this will create, this will create peer pressure. What you want.
You're right.
Want people to have. And you're all drinking from the same source.
The other piece of that is showing the way the aquifer flows on the salt water, fresh water.
Right.
Flows on the salt water intrudes more, especially in the low-lying areas.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to run out of clean fresh water eventually. Sorry.
Any other questions for Alice?
So the maybe the other questions about development restriction, it just seems like it's not stuff. I mean, especially while I'm here, you're talking.
So is anything being done is the question. Not nearly enough, in my opinion. So in other places, Louisiana is a good example, where they have been really hammered by this in a very dramatic way more than once. So Long Island has really only been really hammered by this in a super dramatic, traumatic way in Superstorm Sandy, and not before that, not really since 1930s. So our memories are short, and so I think people are like, oh well, we got that out of the way. So but in Louisiana, they've been really hammered over and over, and they are starting to change coastal policy about development. For example, not allowing new development in this place. I think maybe Long Island is not quite there yet, but it will make a lot of sense at some point to do that, because what happens is when you have development in those zones, then you have people in harm's way, and you have to take care of them, and you have to protect them. When a lot of people decide they're done and they want to move out, but if you hang out, you still have to bring them electricity, you still have to get their garbage picked up, you still have to send the school bus down there, all of those things. And that puts a tremendous burden on everyone.
Well, and if you think of the trends in the last 50 years, so everybody knows, follow this in a small little house on Acrobatic Property, maybe on Girard Drive, or a small little fishing shack on the bay side of Dune Road, or even on the ocean. And those little shacks have all been converted in the form of tear downs from a 600, 800,000 square foot little cottage to a McMansion designed by, distinguished architects in the region. No disrespect to any board architects. But so we have this rush of money being invested in the shoreline and near the shoreline, which then results in everybody wanting to walk in a stone wall or something like that. And that's a really disturbing image of 6 feet rise in sea level.
6 feet, that's taller than me. That's a big change.
And
the
places
everyday water.
like Long Beach and Noyak, and Napi, and Hashimama Pond, and places near Sag Harbor, 6 feet of water doesn't really go well there.
Right, so just to point out a few things, like, so Gerard Drive, Nakamatic Harbor, this is what we were talking about, that's right here. Hashimama Pond, that's here, that's where Long Island down in Nakamatic Bay begin to connect.
That's a
Pretty
second-
soon, actually.
that 6 feet of water makes you forgetting about whether there's other things in the way. 6 feet of water is an inlet that connects Peconic Bay now to Long Island Sound. That's an inlet.
The sea level rise component relative to the shoreline recession is an interesting statistic, and nobody seems to talk about it. Somewhere in the 50-to-1 ratio. So if the sea level goes up 2 feet, it
Right.
goes back up.
Long Island is very flat. As everybody knows who lives here and has driven around anywhere, you can see the landfill pretty much everywhere, that's how flat. So what Ramesh is saying, that vertical change in sea level actually means that the area flooded goes way back inland. So, and that's why even the smaller rises in sea level causes big swaths of the coastline to turn blue, because everything goes underwater. All of our marsh islands, all of Fire Island, with 6 feet, pretty much all of Fire Island is underwater.
So you lose that barrier, that means there's no longer any storm protection for South Shore.
Does the model show Fire Island actually rolling back?
Well, so here's the
Drowning
thing.
in place.
If we could get out of the way, Fire Island would roll back and maintain itself. Reaches would come through, sand would move behind, it would close itself up, it would migrate. It's a big sandbar. It would move around, but it would move closer to the layer, and it would maintain itself as a barrier island, or at minimum, a significant barrier. But what we do is we take the little beach shacks and we build them into the mansions, and then we build walls around them, and Army Corps comes and dumps sand, and we prevent the inlets from forming on their own, and we prevent those natural processes from happening. So if we continue to do that, maybe our place that it may stop.
So let's not kid ourselves. We're going to deal with the very same issues on Blue Road and South Hampton.
Absolutely, yeah. This is not just a Fire Island National Seashore problem. This is a
Iron Point in downtown Britain
Yes.
are vastly different looking places.
I mean, everyone who's ever been to Riverhead during a big storm knows, it's only not this far away from flooding all the time, as it is. It's a very different.
So you're working on innovative and paradigm changing strategies to solve all these problems.
That's the idea. It starts with.
Round of applause.
What we have to do is change the way we think about it. It's like it's part of our culture in America, not just in America, but I think it's particularly strong in America. We are stronger than the storm, and New York rising, and we're not going to let Mother Nature beat us. I mean, it's just absurd. So what we need to do is plan to adapt instead of fight against it.
Einstein's quote, unfortunately, the problems that we have to solve will require a different level of thinking than we did at the time we created.
You can't solve
Can't.
problem, same thing.
Same
you
mind
use
created.
when you-
Thank you. I remember something.
Exactly.
So in effect, we need new tools and ideas
New tools and ideas.
so that they can manage what these changes. That up until now, land use planning and zoning on Long Island has never really happened.
That's right. And what we've always done is dilution is the solution to pollution. Spread everybody out and we'll minimize pollution. And we're seeing with water quality that we've passed the point that works. And the fact is, our development is all centered around the coast because people love water. That's why we live here. So what we need to do is rethink that plan. It's not as simple as just saying, okay, nobody's allowed to live by the coast anymore. You can't do that. You can't just kick everybody out of the island.
Not in the present
So we need to do some real planning to figure out a mechanism to make it possible for people to leave the edge if they want and not have the next guy just move right in and build a bigger fancy mansion. We need to figure out ways to fund all that planning and then to fund the implementation of those plans. And you know, as the Nature Conservancy, we think it's super important that the community is the one that decides. You know, we don't want me or the governor or any of you going into some neighborhood and saying, okay, here's what we need to do. We're gonna move these people and we're gonna put a park here and we're gonna put wetlands here. It'll never happen. It'll be a lovely color plan, this thick with all kinds of information, and it'll sit on the shelf. Put my feet up on it under my desk. We need the community to decide what they want, what their vision is, and then help them figure out a plan to realize that vision. And to
I feel like the reaction to the sea level rise is always, like you were saying, you know, to build a wall there, like what happened in Montauk. And without the real, I mean, I feel like when all that happened, you know, there was just a few people that really sort of understood the consequences, and the information wasn't really out there. And I feel like if the information had have been more, so there's more transparency, and there's, you know, I feel like it would be completely different, the reaction to it, because building structures like that, I mean, it changes the whole sort of dynamics of the coastline and everything. And it was just to save a couple of hotels, and I don't know how. And it's almost like, you're right, it's about a different way of thinking, but it's also about you know, what is fueling this, you know, this sort of reaction to things, which is so save our, you know, save these businesses rather than save the, you know, the town.
So, and that's why I think it's important to do this planning now while we're not in the crisis. Because when the hotels were falling in water and the Army Corps said, we have money, but we gotta spend it in 6 months, there's no time for a study.
They need some legislation. I think that it needs some, because we do have the science, you know, we do have the understanding of, you know, we have to move everything back. And the studies are out there, and you saw how that study came out, how all the wetlands saved $650 million of damage during Sandy. And it was intact wetlands, it was areas that had no buildings. And they were the areas that were saved.
So that natural infrastructure, wetlands, and to some extent also shellfish beds and seagrasses underwater, those, we call that natural infrastructure. That protects us, whoever's living behind it, from all of that energy. It slows down that wave and storm energy. It protects us from a lot of erosion and impact of severe weather events. So it's really important that we have to keep those places, like the Congress really always talks about, wetlands are important because they're nursery habitats fish and they help filter the water, but they're also important for the people. So we have to keep them healthy and keep them in place, not just for the fish and for the water quality, but also for the people.
So it's fair to say that we have a reasonable anticipation that climate change and climate adaptation chapter in the CCMP will present major policy issues for the region.
That would be, yes, I think it's kind of to be determined a little bit still based on the input that we get from the stakeholder meetings and what people think should be in that plan and what strategies that stakeholders think that we should use to address climate change. But I think a part of it will definitely be working with the towns and our partners on planning, like Allison talked about, to prepare for climate change. And the other part of it is, I think, making our habitat more resilient to climate change. It's also going to be part of our plan.
I think to add to that, even on a larger scale, climate change is going to have to be built into just about everything. I mean, you're looking at increased precipitation, you're looking at increased heat index. You know, the sea is one thing, and it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around stopping the sea, but it's water coming from everywhere too.
Yeah.
So that's gonna play into all of it. I mean, every single portion is gonna have some sort of, I don't know, climate adaptation is the correct word, but this is what's happening. I mean, maybe I'm not as completely positive that we can reach the low blue line, but
We would
so
really
we fall somewhere in the middle as best estimates, and, okay, so it's coming. Hands down, like we can all turn in our cars tomorrow, but it's not stopping it. So it is, so what are we going to do about, even if we take a mid-level IPCC averages of what's coming, even if we look at only from, this is happening at mean high tide, it's still gonna happen somewhere in that range, whether it's 1 foot or 6 foot, it's still gonna happen. And that speaks to everything, the water quality, the habitat. And then some of that's gonna have to go into QCMP, even if it's on an overarching, even if that's what's discussed first, and then addressed in each additional chapter.
So that's, I think, exactly it. Although we're going to have a chapter where we wanted to focus specifically on climate change, it is already addressed in our new habitat restoration plan. It's going to be addressed in the habitat chapter, it's going to be addressed in the water quality chapter, because we have to consider it in everything in every management decision that we're making.
I think it's the right way to do it, because frankly, is it.
It's the new nitrogen. That's
Yeah.
No, really, I agree.
And I just want to add one more thing. We are doing a climate vulnerability assessment. So that is, we hired a consultant, Anchor QA, to do that climate vulnerability assessment. So they are going to look at what are our vulnerabilities in the estuary and how can we incorporate climate change into all of our decision making and address that issue better. So a lot of what comes out of that, I think, those recommendations and analysis will be put into this new.
One suggestion.
Yes.
And I say this from a science perspective, because I deal with all of them. And one of the major resistance immediately anti-climate change, which is a real battle. But the biggest thing on this, the other very people, you guys have to do the county, I do a presentation, and also we did a great job with this presentation, very scientific, totally understood. But what most people don't want to hear is that we are contributing climate change, right? And then they don't want to hear that CO2 is causing the problem. But if I show them the data, I say, look, this is sea level rise. In 1950 to present day, these are buoys that position our coast, right? You can't argue with them. I mean, you just cannot argue. And you have to predict. You must say, look, I'm keeping CO2 out of this picture. I mean, just talking about CO2. What are we going to do?
Right, I mean, I would almost argue with the point at this juncture, it's not something that shouldn't be on another front, but for this purpose, it's coming. So, right, stick to what the science is telling you. We're here, not how we got here, necessarily, but we're here.
The results are.
Right.
The results of what's happening are.
Right.
Yes, but there's also the emissions reduction and stuff like that. And I was recently reading a study on tree-lined roads. You have a tree-lined road, and it cuts 30% of the emissions from cars. Like 30% of cars are transportation is the main polluter and industry. And I mean, it was just about 30%. And how many roads and car parks do we see with like no trees? Nothing. There's really simple things like that. I can't understand why there's not more sort of action on, just trying to reduce the emissions right on at that ground level as well. It just could be so much more, and those seaweed farms and stuff like that. I'm glad you didn't mention there's just it affects everything. I've recently heard climate change reality project. I don't know the outdoor.
Yes,
And that is don't watch that, because that is really you feel really upset. Honestly, I'm glad that you didn't have the really up-to-date stuff. I actually
Yeah, usually when I talk about this, to your point, Joe, I don't give any of that stuff at the beginning. I don't show the temperature change curves. I just say the water's warmer and it's flooding us all the time. So what are we going to do about it? Because nobody can argue with that. We see it. People who live here see it every single day. And so for me, and I think for a lot of people, that has to be the starting point of the conversation. This is what I see with my own eyes. So now what do we do?
In terms of the,
Last one, because you might have enough time.
and East Hampton has a grant, physical assessment and resilience plan, which Allison sits it should be done well before the CCMP, so it may be a useful kind of case study that.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, East Hampton is doing a good job as.
But they haven't done it yet.
They're trying, they're really trying. And they're doing a great job. They're trying. They're leading sort of on some of the things.
Okay. Anybody who wants to keep talking, talk to the party you want to talk to. Do you want to give the fast plug on?
So in Southampton, I have responsibility for doing outreach for the Homeowner. These are programs that are funded by New York State. They are free, and you're never going to hear, utility encourage you to do them because it's going out of business model. But there's a lot of consistency in what we're all driving towards. But the rooftop solar program, we're 3 years into it. It has been a huge success. The best way to connect with people is face-to-face presentations. It's a direct, if you put solar on your roof, you can basically get it for free. I do lots of presentations. And I did an event in Hampton Bays 2 weeks ago. It was an electric vehicle. And the best way to deal with transportation emissions is go out and buy an EV. They're incredibly cheap. There's federal I just got one myself. Federal subsidies like up to $8,000. State subsidies, the subsidies from the manufacturers. If you lease it, you get more money. So yeah, it's expensive to use a car, but for like a little $20,000, you can be driving a brand new electric vehicle a lot cheaper. Chevy Glow is like under $20,000. But that's the solar program, and then home energy efficiency. All of these things basically, reduce your carbon footprint, and contribute in a positive way to what you're talking about. But they also reduce your electric bills, and that's why the state is subsidizing these programs. Because if you engage in these things, make these improvements, and change the way you think about your electricity, you will reduce the demand for electricity. Reduce the amount of infrastructure, ESG, and life I have to build in order to meet my needs. And it will reduce your costs. We pay the second highest electric rates in the country.
Well, I want to say, I had someone come to my house to give me a survey of my energy efficiency. It was offered on my electric bill, and the quotes they gave me for the improvements were outrageous. They were, one was almost triple and one was double, and what I ended up paying. So I caution anyone to use the contractors who are part of that program. I don't know what they're saying. Your zip code makes you a Richie. I'm not, but I have a real view for this program because I called Fred Field's office and I told him, and I said, here is the report that I got. Here are the estimates I got, and this is what I ended up paying. And he was like, "We'll look into it." And then he said they're going to monitor. And I was like, "There's something wrong with the situation." So I know we're all over time, but I really caution everyone to use those contractors.
When I do the presentation, I do address this, and we occasionally have share this process, and I chase them.
No one has ever asked